Hello, everybody. This is Binkhorsts and Blockbusters. I'm Kate,
And I'm Garrett.
and this is a podcast where brothers, sisters, siblings discuss media, movies, and TV. And tonight we are talking about the movie Women Talking, which I think came out last year, and it's about women talking.
Yes, it was nominated for Best Picture.
Yeah, and it is a really good film that I'm really excited to talk about. But first, we have some other stuff to talk about.
So,
Like
Kate, what's on TV?
So I finished watching The Marvelous Miss Maisel in its entirety last weekend. It was really good and it had lots of laughs, lots of cringe moments. If you don't know, it's a show about a female comedian and her life living in New York in the 60s up until the later stages of her career in the last season. So,
Hmm.
have you watched any of this?
I think I might have watched an episode when it first came out, but that was years and years ago because this has been going on for a long time. This was one of like the first Prime originals, wasn't it?
Yeah, yeah, I think it was. Yeah, now that I'm thinking about it, I think I watched the first season when I was working on a dress, sewing a dress when I was unemployed in 2019. So, yeah, that tracks. It's been a
I,
while. It's fun how I can associate TV shows with what I was making while I was watching them.
I understand. There was a period, I think, when I first got Netflix and watched all of Lost while playing Minecraft in the early to mid 2000s. So,
Wow, what a waste of time that activity
yeah,
was.
Lost turned out to be nothing. Uh,
Yeah, no spoilers on Lost for anybody who wants to pick that up, but we don't recommend going down that particular rabbit hole.
no,
No. I gotta say, Lost was great in the moment as a water cooler. I think it was the last. I mean, Game of Thrones definitely people watched week to week and talked at the water cooler, and it had that kind of a phenomenon. But I think Lost was the last like big four channel television shows where people went to work the next day excited to talk to their friends about it and speculate on online forums and those kinds of things. And it's kind of become a lost art in the streaming world.
yeah, even in high school, I remember people always talking about, oh, the next episode of Breaking Bad, because that was really popular then, or The Walking Dead, both of those on AMC. And I feel like all of those kind of went downhill in some way, shape, or form.
I liked the end of Breaking Bad, but neither of those really had the same kind of like speculation
That's
ability as
true.
Lost
That's
did,
true.
because Lost was such a bizarre, like no one really knew what was going on kind of a show, whereas like Breaking Bad, I think we all knew, what was going to happen eventually. Um, and Walking Dead, also, everybody knew everybody was going to die eventually because of zombies.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
yeah.
zombies win 100% of the time.
Yeah, zombies and drug cartels, they seem to have something in common there.
Hmm. I wonder
Hmm.
what that is.
They tend to win.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
the manpower. So what other Amazon original have you been watching?
I've been watching Wheel of Time, and so full disclosure, I've not read the books, but I'm a huge science fiction and fantasy nerd, and I'm probably gonna wait to read the books until after the new season is finished. They are releasing the episodes week to week. I think there's 4 episodes of season 2 out right now as we're recording. I think there'll be more out by the time this is live, but I really enjoyed season 1 and the parts of season 2 that I've seen. And I think that it is a fun fantasy world. I know that a lot of people who've read the books, had some thoughts, as you always do with these kinds of situations. I think, with anything from Lord of the Rings to Harry Potter to um, anything else, you're gonna have those discussions. But I also, in the context of talking about women talking tonight, Wheel of Time has such a feminist approach that I think that it's worth watching for, and I'm sure reading about too, for having a fantasy world that has significant female characters, which is not something that most fantasy worlds have.
Yeah, after doing rewatches of, even Lord of the Rings, there's one or two, maybe three
Yeah,
women in that whole series.
there are three women in Lord of the Rings. There's Galadriel, Eowyn, and Arwen. And yes, they exist solely for the purpose of um, hanging out with men, I think. But I mean,
Yes.
they're also, Galadriel is a powerful female
Oh
elf.
yeah, she's badass.
Eowyn does kill a ring wraith, and
Very
Arwen
badass.
carries a sword around, I guess. I don't know.
Well,
In
y-
dreams. Sword
yes.
dreams.
Well, they saved Mr. Frodo on the horse.
Oh yeah, yeah. Yeah, she saves
Yeah, they're
saves
they're
Mr. Frodo.
they're useful.
Yeah, yeah. I mean I guess the other thing that she does is she does give Aragorn the hope and courage that he needed to become king, which is important,
Yeah,
you know.
very. So,
Us women folk have our uses in that department.
so I watched a couple episodes of this when it came out of the original series, and well, one of the funny things, one of the people I played Dungeons and Dragons with has read all the books, and there were so many things from just like the first couple episodes of things that like I noticed they had just like repurposed and dropped in
Ha.
into our campaign. Like
Mhm.
I think they have like the White Spire or like the White Tower is like the wizards or something. And in our game, it was the Ivory Spire. And we have like a
Yep.
Children of Light organization that changes what it means every so often. Um, so if you're into fantasy and you want to rip things off, or I'm sorry, borrow things for your tabletop games, I think this would be a good one to do so.
Yeah, I think it's a great fantasy world, and it's really funny because I'm reading a couple books in the Shadow and Bone universe, and I actually kind of got a little confused at one point because there are certain elements of magic that appear in both, and these are completely unrelated fantasy worlds. Like they exist in totally different decades of writing and magic and everything. And but like both have very solid magic worlds, and like I forget what the like terminology is for like the way magic exists in a world like in Harry Potter, like the wands and
Hmm.
words and thoughts, like whatever. In Lord of the Rings, magic is very different.
Yes.
It's much more limited. To Gandalf can make his staff light up, and he can say things to a Balrog, and he can kind of do like he can't do mind control, but he can do kind of like deception checks and those kinds of things. But yeah, it's totally different from like in Wheel of Time. The kind of magic that they have access to is much more serious.
Well, that's cool. I
Yeah,
might have to give this one another try then.
I think you should. I think that you'll like it, and it'll be interesting to talk about the way that they do things, because I mean, because I haven't read the books, like, I don't know how it's supposed to be or whatever.
Right.
But, like the way they handle certain things, the different characters, the different, there's a lot of great set design, there's a lot of great costuming. And, okay, so this is slight spoiler, so skip ahead if you don't want to know anything. But the different kinds of magic users wear different colors based on the kind of the kind of magic they specialize in. And I just want to give the costume designers and whoever thought of that, maybe it's in the book, maybe it's not, Like, yes, bow down to you. Thank you for delineating the factions clearly in a way I can understand.
That's going to be so great to understand, and it's not just everybody's wearing brown.
Yeah, not everybody's wearing brown. Like and it's they've also cast like all the cast are like there's a lot of different ethnicities. There's several Indian or that kind of Asian looking women. So everybody looks sufficiently different that I'm not confused.
It's not all the white captains on the sailboats on the Titanic.
Right. Yes. Yes. It's very nice. And a lot of them are women, so you have lots of different exciting styles of dress and hair and there also, like things like braiding your hair, which we'll talk about in Women Talking, is an important activity of togetherness and closeness that also happens in Wheel of Time. So, you know, feminism. But that's all I have to say on that.
Okay, great. So transitioning to our new feminist icon, I've been watching more Star Wars.
So, are you caught up?
I think so. So I guess this will be a little bit of spoiler talk too. I
Yeah,
guess up to the
definitely.
fifth episode that's out now.
Yeah, something like that. But skip ahead if you want no Star Wars spoilers. I saw a Star Wars spoiler on Facebook on Tuesday night at like 10:30, and
You're
it
too
came out at
late. You're
9.
you're too
And
late.
I'm just like, Jesus, like, can we just wait until tomorrow? Like, I usually, like, so I've been going into the office on Wednesdays, so now I have to watch it after work on Wednesdays. But I was previously watching them during my lunch break, and that's perfect because I'm not staying up until 9 o'clock to watch something on television. I can't deal with that. That's too
See,
late. It should be 8 o'clock. That would be doable.
it comes out earlier for me because I'm on the West Coast.
Yeah, well, enjoy that. Enjoy being on the West Coast.
I enjoy it very much.
Yeah, I'm sure you do. Anyway, we have Gritty. It's very exciting. But okay, spoilers are starting now. Skip ahead, please. The whales are so fucking cool.
I okay, sure. I just I I'm at a loss because like I don't want to like watch 80 hours of animated cartoons to understand everything that's going on. But we have like an episode that takes place where, one of the characters is basically dead. And it's like a really good retelling of like this whole relationship that her and Anakin have and like of her past that we could have gotten at like the beginning of the season or when this character was introduced in live action before that would have like I think worked really well in establishing all of these characters and who the hell they are. Um, I'm just so confused when I watch it because I'm like, who are these people? Why does it matter? How much power do any of these people actually have? Because like there's a plot point in the last episode that's just like, oh, this general has gone off and done like her own mission, and the whole Republic fleet is just like, well, we got to stop them from doing that. And I'm just very confused. Who has the power here? What's the structure? I thought
Well,
these
I
were
think
like,
I think the answer there is bureaucracy and red tape are always the problem with everything in this
but
universe.
these are supposed to be the guerrilla rebels.
Yeah, but like that's why the Empire and the New Order and the bad guys keep getting back in power because the
They
extreme amount of
they
bureaucracy.
just have better bureaucracy.
Yes, they have better bureaucracy.
So like, okay,
They have
I'll
clones too. Like that helps.
no, they stopped doing that. I'm pretty sure.
Well, what are the
The stormtroopers
um
aren't clones anymore.
oh,
So
okay. Well,
so in
whatever.
in
Fine, they
in the
have drones.
future,
They have mindless drones.
okay, the better somehow. So I have one problem with this, and that's that like I don't feel like the characters' actions really have stakes anymore. Like we've already had two characters come back from things that have very that have like nearly killed or have killed other characters before with like no consequences. And like I just think back to like the original Star Wars where like Luke loses his hand and like Han gets sold and like frozen in the carbonite and like Liam Neeson just gets outright killed in the first one. It's just like they want to have their cake of having these like big emotional moments and then not have like the like actual
Right.
ramifications of killing off these characters. Like
Well, and I think that was both one of like I mean obviously Rogue One, like that's the best part of Rogue One is that you know how that's going to resolve.
and you still get
And
attached to the characters.
yeah, yeah. I mean, and so that by the end you're just like, oh, this is terrible. And then I think that Andor kind of suffered from the same problem, but handled this all much better because you know that Andor is in Rogue One, so he lives to that point. But
Anybody else can die.
anybody else can die
Yeah.
and they do and it's also like how your heart is so attached to him and the cause and like what's going on and like blah 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 it's just very good. I think that's the other problem with Ashoka is that she's a Jedi and Jedi are boring.
Yeah. I
Like
have to
they're
100%
emotionless.
agree.
like like there's a reason why people like Grogu. There's a reason why people liked Yoda. There's a reason why they like Samuel Jackson the Jedi. Um, but absent those qualities, like ew, like Obi-Wan, boring. As a person, as a character.
Right.
Ew.
Right.
Like while they have these internal struggles between good and evil, like cool, don't we all? Yeah, boring.
Like so many scenes in this show I feel like are just Ashoka or other people just like standing around looking at things and then
Hmm.
like 30 seconds later they're like we need to bring another person in to look at this thing.
Yeah, well, but thankfully they're on a new and cool planet, which kind of looks like Caladan plus red trees. I don't
Yeah.
know.
I
There's pros and
so
cons
one
here.
thing I think that hinders every one of these shows, other than Andor, because Andor didn't rely on it as much, is the big light stage that they film it on. So they're just
Hmm.
like, oh yeah, we can have like all these really cool backdrops, but then like we don't interact with them at all, and it's very clear. Like
Oh, yeah.
you know in Attack of the Clones, there's a fight between Yoda and Count Dooku, and like I think Obi-Wan and Anakin are there, and they're in like basically like a warehouse or like something, and they're just like jumping around, jumping on platforms, like pulling out things in the wall with the Force, like they're really interacting with their environment. But every single fight in modern Star Wars has just been people in like a very static room, or if they're outside, they're just like in a clearing in the woods. It's it's very
That's true.
unimaginative. Like you have
Yeah,
all
I
these
mean,
people
there's
who are
been a
superhuman.
couple. Yeah, there's been a couple that are a little better than that, like in the other one, Boba Fett in the town, but yeah. Anyway, this isn't a Star Wars podcast, I'm sorry.
No, no, we've talked
We
about
went
it
on
for too
yeah,
long.
let's move on. Next, what
Okay,
else is on
okay.
TV?
So we've
Peacock.
regressed. Yeah, so we've regressed with television and streaming and internet. So I'm paying for internet and I just get Peacock now. That's just something they've given me for having an internet subscription. And it's like included with my plan or some bullshit. And so I've been checking it out. So Peacock has some good stuff. I've watched a bunch of movies on here that aren't available anywhere else. They have a lot of like only streaming on Peacock movies of like new stuff. Like they have the new Mario movie, that's one of them. And they have the new Wes Anderson movie, which I checked out. That was cool. They also have some smaller things, and they have some classics. Like I watched the Texas Chainsaw Massacre for the first time. That was fun. And they have some originals, which are okay. I watched Twisted Metal and was kind of underwhelmed. Um, for a Mad Max type thing based off a video game, I thought it was rather uninspired, but you know,
Hmm.
who knows? Um, So I bring this up because one thing I really dislike on the app is they have a tomato, uh, the Rotten Tomatoes tomato rating for every single one of these movies. And I think that that's just like a really bad metric. Like, Amazon and like Netflix have like thumbs up and 5 stars, and those are all rated by people within that app. But yet on Peacock, there's this whole other app that you can go to that aggregates um, critic responses and then gives you a rating on them. And I bring this up because recently there was like this article written by Vulture that was about PR firm that was being hired out to inflate scores on Rotten Tomatoes by paying independent critics to write favorable reviews. And how Rotten Tomatoes works is it says, okay, here are critics who are established in some way, shape, or form that are publishing somewhere. These aren't just like people like us that are just out at an armchair. And they say, okay, here's how many favorable reviews there are out of the total. And if you have like 60% of the reviews are favorable, positive, it's a binary. It's either positive or a negative review. There's no in between. There's no metric on there. Then, that determines how good of a movie it is. I think that's really terrible. Like even 1 to 10 is better, even though everybody's idea of what 1 to 10 is, ludicrous. Um,
Hmm. Yeah.
Especially coming from the American education system where a 7 is all right and anything below that is a failure, 70%, let's say.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see what your argument there. I have to say I have never noticed. I have never looked at a Amazon rating or Netflix rating on anything ever in my life. Um, but at the same time, like I agree. I mean, that happens on Amazon like for product reviews. Like they pay
Oh yeah.
people to write things and, blah 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 blah. And a movie is not just good or bad. Like there's no movie that I could say is just good or bad,
Right, it's a
you know?
spectrum. Like no
Yeah.
movie
Like there's a
excels
reason why it's good or
universally.
bad.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like is it Big Trouble in Little China?
Yes.
Yeah. Big Trouble in Little China. Bad movie. Terrible. Not good. But great movie for what it does.
Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah, fun, Like Transformers. Stupid, terrible,
Awful.
but also stupid and terrible. Like, yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, like, yeah, but visually stunning, cool, like, whatever.
Big
Um,
monster go crash.
yeah, I mean, I could talk about how 2012, a movie that we spent like 10 minutes talking about a couple weeks ago, that we were not reviewing. Like, I could talk about how terrible that is, but I could also talk about how good it is, clearly.
Yeah.
So, yeah, yeah.
And so this highlights something that I think we're seeing in movies now where certain things are being developed by committee and so much is going forward to just being like, well, it's not about making art anymore, it's about making something that has a good rating, making something that's like approachable and people are going to say good things about, so that way we get more exposure, more money out of it. And it's
I
just really
mean,
gross.
yeah, and I mean that works for Disney movies and kids movies, and that's about it.
You would think people have a lot more critical ability, but as we'll talk about with this movie, media literacy is not a high note. Uh, so the one final segment before we get into the film today. So bad news continues. Tonight on strike updates, there's a scab alert. Both Bill Maher and the Drew Barrymore, they're bringing back their talk shows without their writers. Good on them. Great work.
Yeah, Drew Barrymore's show, I think maybe she could carry that without writers, but Bill Maher, like that's going to be a shit show. I do not want to hear what he has to say.
I don't want to hear what he has to say in general, but
Well,
alrighty.
yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, there is very little that I hate more than Bill Maher in this universe. Would I rather watch Fox than Bill Maher? Maybe. Like
I
that's how bad I
I
hate Bill Maher.
I feel like it's easier to like mock and roast Fox than it is to like
That's true. Yeah, more
tolerate
entertaining.
listening to Bill Maher.
Oh God. Yeah.
I, I,
Yeah.
I didn't know you were so viscerally against him. It makes this funnier. Like,
Yeah, no, I mean, like I have definitely left a room before because somebody was watching Bill Maher.
so today marks 135 days of the writer's strike. Uh, we're getting really close to that October that like would surpass the last strike. Um,
Yeah. Well, and I
and
saw today that if they don't get it together by October, the this whole year's season of television is kaput.
yeah, so the 23, 24 projects are being super delayed, and if they don't get it started by then, they're not going to have much for 24. So
Right. And in general, we're talking about like shows that are on television, right? Like ABC, CBS, like
yeah,
I'm
like
thinking about like
network television.
NCIS and,
Yeah,
Jeopardy and,
and new seasons of Law and Order or whatever. Yeah,
Lost. We could have new seasons of Lost. That's what
yeah,
this strike is taking from us. That's what we should do. It's we should just, as a collective of scabs, we should write a new season of Lost for them to film.
that's the reboot that we need. We need to unseat J.J. Abrams permanently.
Yes,
Uh,
and it should be all the actors are scabs, all the writers are scabs. It's completely, scabalicious. Um,
uh,
yeah.
so also in this horrible reality we live in, the premium versions of Hulu and Disney Plus that are without advertisements are jumping in price by 20%. Uh,
Yeah,
where
yeah.
that money is going, who fucking knows? Because it's not going to the people working on this stuff.
Yeah, so I'm gonna keep Hulu, but our Disney Plus, our family's Disney Plus subscription is in jeopardy because
I don't care
I
about
just I
Star
don't think
Wars
I
that much.
can I don't think I can justify it. The only thing I watch on Disney Plus is the Star Wars content, and once Ahsoka's gone, I mean Mandalorian I don't think is starting again for a while, but I won't know because Disney Plus is terrible at advertising.
This is
So,
true.
yeah,
You know,
when Ahsoka's over, we'll
this is fine with
unsubscribe.
me. As long as I can get the HBO Max on the TV to work again, we're all good.
That might have
Um,
been my fault. I had to log in on mine and maybe it weird, I don't know. The joys of long distance family shared television.
well,
Anyway,
so going back to talking about Breaking Bad, I saw a thing where Aaron Paul, who plays one of the main characters in there, said that he never has gotten a dime from the streaming on Netflix. And that's where I
holy
watched
crap.
that whole series. And like he's a
Yeah.
huge part of that. Like
Well, and I watched, so back in the day, I watched it all of Breaking Bad on up until the last half of the last season because they broke it up into two
yeah,
halves. I watched the last half of the last season live, but everything else was on Netflix.
yeah.
F
I
that
feel
Netflix.
I feel like half of the like anybody I talk to says they've watched it on there or have rewatched it on there. Like that's crazy to me that they're not seeing the money from that because that's hundreds and hundreds of thousands of hours of watch time. It's
Right.
crazy.
Yeah.
Um,
It really is too bad. But I don't want to go back to television with commercials, Garrett.
no, I hate commercials. I
I think I'd
hate
rather
them.
not watch television.
I
And I mean,
know.
we do a media podcast, and I'm saying that I would rather not watch television if it means commercials. So,
God, I hate them. They're so
yeah.
intrusive. And all the ones about vaping just make me want to smoke again. It's terrible. All
I don't see any of those kinds of
you don't
commercials
you
because I
don't
live in a commercialist world right now, and
you
I want
don't
to keep it this
see
way.
all of the commercials that are by anti-vaping companies that make vaping seem cool and fun. You don't see those?
No, in
Damn.
Philadelphia, we are the only commercials they have in Philadelphia are about online sports gambling.
Oh, okay. That's fair.
Yeah.
That's somehow worse.
I love sitting waiting for the subway and see probably
MyBookie.net.
hundreds of dollar television that could that money could be used to have a screen that tells me when the train is coming, but telling me that I need to bet on the Eagles tonight, which I hate gambling. I really think that, like, we should A, never have gambling advertised,
No.
and B, should not have access to gambling like we do. I mean, if you want to go gamble, I think that you should have to go to a place to go gamble, and then at least, you have to go there and you have to leave. But with online gambling, you can just do it all the time, wherever you are, for imaginary money that you can't see or comprehend, and it's a problem. But anyway.
So, in lighter news, if you want to support the members of the strike and various organizations, you can buy a signed Funko Pop of the Hulk for $500.
Yeah, well, you're bidding on it. It's probably gone up in price by now.
I checked the price before. I'll put something in post with how much it's up to.
But there's
I just thought that
also,
was the doofiest one, but
yeah, that was pretty dumb. But I did like some of the others. Like, one of them was have an actress come and paint a mural in your home. Others are,
I think
having dinner or a Zoom call with different famous people. And I think
Jonathan
that's a really fun way to
Lithgow
make money.
Jonathan Lithgow was gonna paint a picture of your dog, and I thought that was pretty good.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, celebrity pet portraits. I mean, let's get this going.
Hello, this is Garrett in post-production, and since recording this episode, the Writers Guild of America have agreed to tentative arrangements to stop the strike. Further details coming in our 15th episode as part of Spooktober. A week after we recorded this episode, both Drew Barrymore and Bill Maher walked back their statements to start their shows. Good on them, I suppose. In other news, the signed Hulk Funko Pop went for $1,225. Back to the show. So we spent a very long time talking about all these things, but we've finally gotten to the main event.
Yeah, so we are going to eschew technology, eschew all of these modern conventions, commercials, televisions, strikes, unions, Bill Maher.
And go to a simpler time and place.
Yeah.
In 2010, a Mennonite village, the story of women talking takes place. So this is based on a book written by Miriam Toews, and they were a part of a Mennonite group in Manitoba, Canada. So they pulled on real life experiences. They based some of the characters off of their friends and family, and they culminated a lot of that to write this book. Uh, the movie has won several awards for the best adapted screenplay, and it features an ensemble cast. It was directed by Sarah Polley. Uh, in terms of its box office potential, it's rather low, grossed a total of $9 million worldwide. Apparently, it had one of the worst openings of the year, garnering only 40,000 in its opening weekend. And this was released around Christmas, and apparently that and winter storms are to blame for its poor performance. But like we mentioned at the start, it was nominated for a Best Picture, um, and I think it's very good.
Yeah, yeah, this is a really good movie, and it has a lot to say, and we have a lot to say about it. And I think that the reason why it didn't do well, and I completely understand, it is not a movie that appeals to a wide audience, but it should. I think this is a movie that most people should watch. But the subject matter is not like something that people go to the movies to see.
Yeah, it's not a movie I think I would have watched without you saying we should watch it.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, coming from the male perspective of,
Mhm.
just outward looking at this doesn't seem like one that, I would gravitate towards. But I ended up really enjoying it.
Yeah, it is about women talking. And as I found out online when I read some and watched some reviews of this film, it turns out men not interested in women talking.
I'm sorry, you were talking?
It's terrible.
Yeah, I feel
But
like media literacy is something that like if you come into this movie lacking, you're not gonna have a good time.
right. Well, and I think that if you're not willing to approach it critically and to really listen and to like take it in fully, if you're coming into this movie with prejudices and um misogynistic views, those kinds of things, and you're willing to scoff and downplay any single line of dialogue in this movie, you are not taking it seriously. And I think that this is a movie that has to be taken seriously in its entirety.
Yeah, this is
And
not one you can passively watch. You need to
right.
give it your attention, and it deserves it.
Hmm. Yes. And every single line of dialogue is important. And it's like, I remember in like writing class in like high school, they talked about like, oh, everything in that you write should be important to the plot, or character development, or like whatever. And I think in a lot of movies, that is just not taken. Like they throw in jokes and one-liners and non sequiturs and like blah 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 blah, and sometimes that's the point. um but in this movie, every single thing that happens, that is said, everything in the background, it's all important and meaningful.
Yeah, there are so many things that like in one line of dialogue they communicate like whole backstories of characters or set up traits and things like that that have payoffs later or as just one thing sets someone off, and you really need to be able to appreciate all of that. So I watched it a couple times. I've watched it twice now to be able to like gather the whole effect and to be sure I wasn't missing out on it. Because even if you watch something attentively, you're gonna stop, take a break, look at your phone for a bit. And this was one I wanted to know I could talk about by watching the whole thing.
Mhm. Well, and it doesn't have the same problem as, the Titanic officers all looking the same, but there is a uniform and the characters do get confusing.
Yeah.
It is a little hard to tell some of them apart, and I think that that's purposeful.
Yes.
um because it, solidifies that these are family members. It solidifies that they're close community members in a close knit community. They're all wearing very similar clothes. I did find it very interesting, like the costuming. They're all the women are wearing these very conservative dresses in these patterns. They're like floral patterns, and the women, as they get older, wear drabber and darker clothes. Like all of the oldest women in the community are wearing black with like a little bit of a floral, and then the older mothers in the community are wearing like dark colors, like purples and reds and greens, and then the younger women, the unmarried women supposedly, um are wearing like lighter colored things. And I thought that that was interesting, that kind of like as they got older they lose this sense of self-expression through those patterns. And I thought that was just such an interesting little touch to add to the conversation in a movie with very little like set design, and they wear the same dress the whole movie. you know yeah, that was a very nice touch.
Yeah, that's something I hadn't noticed.
Yeah, the other thing about this movie in the kind of like setup and design stuff is that this is very much like a stage play. It kind of all occurs on one stage. You have characters kind of entering the stage and leaving. There are flashes to kind of like other stuff going on in the community, but there's no dialogue in those flashes, and they're either still or not a lot going on in those scenes. And I think that was a very nice way to show the community and life without, spending too much time on it, I guess.
Yeah, I felt like a lot of those shots of just like children running through the fields or like people having setting the table for dinner helped just like establish how real these people were without having scenes that like drag on. It felt like it kept the momentum going.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think that the one problem that I could see someone complaining about in this movie is that there are points, many points actually, where the conversation of the women talking becomes quite circular and wraps back on itself. And I think that, when I was watching and listening, that was something that I like noticed. And I thought, oh, like they're going back to this again. But I think that that was again purposeful because we, the viewer, are sitting in that room with them, going like, oh no, we're going back to this point again. We can't get away from it. Kind of a, moment. And there are many points where the dialogue very much pulls at you and makes you upset for the people because someone else has brought up something else that derails the conversation.
Yeah.
So it's just incredibly well written.
Yeah. So what are they talking about?
So, and this is something that in one of the reviews that I read, and I didn't mention I didn't mention this to you earlier. One of the reviews, the guy said, and it was a guy who was reviewing this film, and many of the reviews on YouTube, when you like search for reviews, are done by men who clearly miss the point entirely. And I'm not saying that all men can't review this movie well. I'm just saying that the popular ones on YouTube miss the mark entirely. But he said that one of the things that was a problem for him is that he didn't understand what was happening to these women and what they were fighting about until halfway through the movie. And that was not the case for me. I knew within the first few scenes, not exactly what had happened, but I had a pretty good idea. How
It's
about you?
it's like almost immediately you're dropped into this is what's going on, this is what's happening. Like they
Right?
preface it pretty deliberately. Like did this
So,
guy just walk into the middle of the movie theater?
no, I really think that there are people watching this film who see a woman in bed with bruises and blood on her legs and messed up blankets and a look of confusion and don't understand what happened to her. And that upset me as much as knowing as the idea that that happened. Like I think that there are some people that are just that far detached from reality of like stuff that happens to women on a daily basis. I'm not saying like this happens to women daily. I would say that like in general women get raped all the time. Like not
Right,
individual women, but like
right.
rape happens to women. This is something that occurs regularly. And some people just don't get it. Like I think that that person is that out of touch.
That's incredibly disappointing.
Yeah. Yeah, it was incredibly disappointing to me as the viewer of that review. Like I just but
So
anyway, the
so
plot is that the women in this community, the young girls have been
oh, they all
waking
have.
up.
not just
Yeah,
the
they
young girls.
yeah. So going back several generations, um, so this has been going on for a while. They've been waking up after having been sexually assaulted or raped, and they have no memory of it. And the line in the beginning is, "We didn't have the words to describe what was happening, so they told us it was demons doing it." And I think that, in an uneducated community where you can't communicate what was happening to you, and you wake up having no idea what was happening, and suddenly all of this terrible stuff is happening, you think that this could just be another part of being a 14-year-old girl that you just were not aware of, which, as many terrible things happen to you as a woman between the ages of 10 and 14, you start to get used to really weird things. Um, but also, in a super religious community where people are very uneducated, these girls don't know how pregnancy happens. They have no sexual education. And so this idea that, oh, it's a demon baby, you know, like that becomes easily accepted.
Right, especially when it's coming down from the elders of this community, the people who are, aged with experience and everything there is. If they tell you it's the devil or ghosts or demons, then you have no reason not to believe them until you catch a man.
Hmm.
And that's where this story kicks off, is they find a man breaking into one of their homes, and he rats out several other men who are part of this sexual assault ring. And the women have a choice to make on basically whether to forgive the men or not. That is how it is framed from their village to them, as the men have gone off into the city to be prosecuted, mostly for their protection, because one of our main characters comes at them with a sickle, which is pretty badass.
Yeah, I think sickle related threats are always approved in my
I,
book.
I mean, in terms of farm equipment, that's a pretty good one.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a lot of good farm equipment for threats. I mean, we really should get back to some good old communistic revolts,
You get some
with our farm
scythes,
implements. Yeah, scythes, the forks, those are good.
pitchforks, yes. A classic
Yeah,
mob is not complete without them,
right. Yeah.
because they don't
Uh,
have all the modern machinery that is truly terrifying.
right. Yeah. Yeah. The kind that could, like a wood chipper, like in Fargo. Uh, yeah.
So the women of the village get together as a community to basically vote on their future here. They've all come to realize that many of them are victims of this, and they have a choice to make as a group, whether they stay and forgive these men, uh, rather they fight these men, or they leave.
Yeah. And they actually do a vote. None of them can read, in the community, so they just mark X's and they count them up, and it has been a tie. So they elect, the heads of some specific families to debate the issues and decide what they're going to do as a community.
Yes, so that's what they talk about.
Hmm.
They debate this issue.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
our
in a very civilized way.
Yeah, honestly. So for their first option of staying, we tossed that out the window pretty quickly because that's not one that was highly voted on. Frances McDormand plays Lady Scarface, who is a much bigger character in the book, but she, basically says, we're not leaving, we're staying. uh, you have to pay your dues to get into heaven. If you leave, if you don't forgive these men, we're not getting into heaven. That's the price you pay. So she takes her and her family out of the picture, and they go back to their house and aren't a part of women talking.
Yeah, it was very much like a exiting at stage left moment where she just leaves. And she definitely has this mentality of, she went through it, you should go through it too. You should just, like, this is part of being a woman, this is part of the devil, this is part of you being a woman, seducing these men, those kinds of ideas. She doesn't say those, but those are the kinds of things that are easily inferred by her actions, and she flat out says that, well, if we leave, you can't get into heaven, and I am getting into heaven, so I'm staying, and that's that. And I appreciated that that was a point of view, um and a necessary one, and I wish that her character had had more lines and stuff, because I think she's a great actress. But at the same time, I think because they cast such a famous actress in that role, we always had the viewer kind of has this assumption that she's going to come back and play a larger role, and
Yeah, I
she
definitely did.
doesn't. And I mean, that's that's part of the conversation too. Her absence is just as important as the conversation that happens in the barn.
Yeah, having such a big actress play this role also highlights that this was a big member of the community and their word meant something. Having them absent means just as much to, you know, our fourth wall of the viewer as it does to them.
Yeah.
So
Well, and
they,
and two, it also is kind of showing a fracturing of the community, as the other women like clearly dismiss her stance and disagree with her.
yeah. Oh, I hate bringing this up,
What?
but there is a man.
There is a man.
We have to talk about the one man that gets, true dialogue and screen presence in this one.
Yeah, so the or you go on.
Hold on, I have to pull up their name. I forgot their
Okay,
name.
well, I will explain him then. So the school teacher for the
August.
town, August, he had left the community, gone to school, and come back to teach. It is inferred that I think his family actually had been kicked out of the community, and he chose to
Yes.
come back to teach,
I
which I
think
think
they
is
allowed
significant.
him.
Okay. And I also think that because he wasn't, I think it's significant that he wasn't invited to go with the rest of the men, or chose not to go with the rest of the men to the jail, like in support, because they didn't arrest everyone. They just arrest some people, and all the other men in the community go for support and solidarity. And, you know, um, and he doesn't go with them. And I think that, that's significant. At the same time, there's so much of me that wishes he wasn't there and wishes he wasn't part of the conversation. And I think that's also the point, is that you're supposed to feel that way. You're supposed to feel that there's this alien sitting in the room taking notes while these women discuss these things.
Yeah, he's brought in under the pretense of like, well, we want somebody to document what we're talking about. And I think that's kind of strange, but you know, I don't know. But I
I think
definitely
that I
go
think
ahead.
that was a reaction because I think that that's what they thought that you were supposed to do. I think it's like maybe the village had meeting minutes, maybe they had meetings, maybe somebody wrote those things down, but these women were obviously never part of that. So they just thought that that was something that needed to be done for posterity and
Hmm.
whatnot.
Yeah, that makes the most sense. But the framing device is the story is everything that this man has written down. The movie that we're watching and the book that is the framing device
Mm,
because these women couldn't write or read, so
right.
they
But
had
in
somebody do it.
the movie, though, the narrator is one of the girls, the younger girls, who's like 13 or 14.
Yeah, and it's telling it to their unborn brother or sister.
Yeah, the baby that
Ona's carrying.
Ona is carrying, yes. Who, and she is, importantly, she is unwed. So this baby is a product of one of these assaults.
Yes, another one of the kind of like biblical themes.
Hmm. Yeah.
So they have basically two ideas that they talk about whether they're going to fight these men when they come back to kind of like reignite what the village is about, um, create a new system where they are treated on the same level, where the women have as much agency and are a part of the decision making, which isn't a thing in these cultures, um, or they leave and abandon the safety and the familiarity that they've lived with all their lives.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and there are so many fantastic conversations about both of these options. The quote that I put on this slide, let's process it into fuel. And I thought that that was just such a fantastic way to talk about discussing your anger and, moving it toward action, which is something that, especially in, liberal spaces, sometimes we struggle with moving from, discussing a problem to actually doing anything about it.
Oh,
And I
right.
thought that that was just such a great quote.
Yeah, like striking and boycotts are always the answer, but you can't do those things unorganized, you know.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, it doesn't matter if we talk about how much we support labor if we ultimately don't elect people that support labor or, you know, don't do anything about it. Like, you know, I mean, I think about, so much of this movie made me think about a lot of the feelings that I had around the George Floyd protests in 2020, which, like, looking back, like what did we accomplish? Not much. Um, but at least people got out there and did stuff and
Yeah.
were seen, I guess. But yeah, yeah, the process into action is the point here.
Yeah, so they can direct themselves towards and they talk about this first as they talk about fighting first. And one of the mothers is like, if these men come back here, I'm going to kill them. Which fair. Honestly, in the criminal justice world, these sort of crimes met with death in places all over the world. But that's not the Christian thing to do. That's not the holy thing to do. That's not pure. That is violent. That is anger. That is letting those baser impulses get to them. And
Hmm.
that's something that they have to wrestle with.
Yeah, and they talk about, like violence begetting more violence and why is yes, you're angry, but doing more violence is not going to help anything. And while, as I'm watching that, I'm of both sides. Like I want to, hurt these people that did this. Like this is terrible. Like they deserve pain and suffering. But on the same token, like what does that giving them pain and suffering really give me?
Right.
And I think that, it I think that this is a reaction that a lot of women have. That like there is visceral anger and there is upset, but there isn't a lot of women that go off and kill people after these kinds of situations. This reaction, I think, fits a pattern that a lot of us fall into of being angry and then forgiving. And they talk about that too, is that forgiveness is very difficult in this situation.
Yeah, especially with how much they feel betrayed by everyone, not just the people responsible. Um,
Yeah.
but the system that exists that has led these men and put men in position of power to undermine them about this going on. Because that's a big thing they talk about is whether or not the systems that you're a part of and that you exist in, if you commit crimes in those systems that you've been led to believe are not terrible, well, aren't you innocent of committing those crimes because it's not been explained, it's not rational, it's not anything outside of what's possible.
Yeah.
But if they stay and fight and lose, or if they stay at all, they're allowing themselves to continue to fall victim to the violence and to the system that has perpetuated the violence against them and their children.
Mhm. Yeah,
So
I'm looking at some of the quotes that I wrote down that kind of fit into these moments. Someone says at one point, forgiveness is better than revenge. And I think that, that's the pattern that has been done. It's that continuing, it's to be angry, but ultimately to forgive because the revenge is so dangerous. And if you do try and fight, you could end up dying, or your kids dying, or your kids being taken away, or you being ostracized by your community. So forgiveness is the continual, like, pattern. You just have to keep forgiving because there's no way for you to get out of this pattern.
and
And the
they're
other,
taught that the forgiveness is the Christian way, and that's how they will
yeah,
get into heaven.
yeah, the forgiveness is a core tenet of their belief, and especially forgiving these male figures. Um, and they don't really talk as much about forgiving each other of the wrongs that they might be doing each other. It's generally about the men. Um, and the other thing, I this didn't necessarily bother me, especially as we got further into the movie, because they set it up that there is a big gender binary, or yeah, gender binary. Yeah, in this community where the men and women are treated very differently. And so when they just described the men as this kind of like catch-all term for all of the men, in the beginning that kind of struck me as like, ugh, like not all men are bad. But when you get down to it and you start figuring out what happened and how many men were involved in this, ring, and then you assume how many men were culpable just by knowing that this was going on in their community. And in addition to the men who, were involved in these families who just failed outright in their duty to protect and defend their families, you get to that you understand that this kind of catch-all, the men, really is like a systemic problem in their community.
Yeah,
The
absolutely.
men are all bad because they all participated in one way or another in this issue.
Yes, and the school teacher is not necessarily exempt of this either because they look to him and at the end they're like, "You're gonna teach them to be better." That's he's left with that. That's their wish onto him.
Hmm. Yeah, and they very much do not invite him to go with them.
No, very specifically, despite the fact that he has a crush against one of our main characters, Oda or
Mm.
Anna. Um,
Una, I
So
think.
one thing that I thought was kind of weird is that the very few male characters that exist in this all very deliberately like still bring up like that kind of conversation. Like he says to her, like, "Oh, I'll marry you and help you raise this child that could be wonderful," and she just very simply says, if I got married, I wouldn't be who I am. I don't want that. And then the only other man that we're introduced with and interact at all is a census taker, who the first like and only interaction he has with this group is two of the girls come out and he asks if they have boyfriends, which I think is weird, but that's 2023 brain going. And I thought that was an excellent detail that they added in of having that interaction. It reminds me of another movie we watched, but I can't remember, where it's just like that's the only thing these people have on their mind is this kind of like lust and expectation for women's subservience to men.
Yeah, yeah, it was a theme in Silence of the Lambs, where
Yes,
every
yes,
man that talked to Clarice Starling, tried to ask her out. And yeah, I think that was a great touch. I think that the census taker in general was a great touch. So halfway through the movie, a pickup truck with a like a radio announcer,
yeah, megaphone
um
type thing.
megaphone, yeah, drives through
A
the
Blues
town.
Brothers car.
Mhm, and announces that it's the 2010 census and everybody needed to come out so they could get counted. And that was the first moment in the movie where you realized what year it was, because these people, like, there's so few identifying technologies, none of their fashion or hair connects to anything modern or fashionable. They don't have any technology in their houses that's visible, so you have no idea what year it is until that census taker comes by and you realize this is a moment in the present.
Yeah. Um, I think, you could think it was earlier. Like, I don't think I would have thought it was, 17 or 1800s, but you definitely could
No.
have thought like early 1900s, like maybe Dust Bowl era or something like that. Yeah,
Yeah.
all this fits in.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, that was one of those that like made you go like, oh, this is bad. Like,
Yeah.
I feel like sometimes, especially when I watch like historical things, I have an easier time like rationalizing what's going on or like understanding what's going on because it happened to people a long time ago, and that makes it
Hmm.
easier to deal with because like, oh, our modern sensibilities have changed, and this is just like, no, your modern sensibilities have not changed this at all. But
Right. Yeah.
because
Well,
and this
and
is part of the media literacy part, is that the framing device of this being a Mennonite community does not matter.
right.
It's what they're talking about, and the fact that like, oh, this is something that's happening now, that scene being like, yeah, this is happening now, this isn't just happening in a Mennonite camp, this is happening, down the street, across the block, this is happening everywhere in the world.
Yeah, yeah. And this, I think that this movie could have been set in, India, and in a closed farming community, that was faith organized. It wouldn't have to be Christian. It could have been in China. It could have been in Indiana. It it could have been a Muslim community. It could have been in any, tightly knit, faith-based community where, and even a lot of the things that they talk about, they don't talk about in Christianity terms. They talk about in terms of faith, like forgiveness. That's a
Mhm.
central tenet of a lot of faith.
Yeah.
And they talk about just faith, my faith in God, and there are many religions that would fit into. Um, so I think that, the setting of this movie, the religion that they were in, doesn't matter. I think even if this was like like a Burning Man esque cult, out in the desert where they were doing a lot of yoga, that could have fit there too. It's just had to be a closely knit community with a gender binary that was hugely important. Um, and that I think was more important than, any kind of actual religion based thing. And, the other thing that this could be about, I mean, a group of sisters in a house, a woman sitting alone having a dialogue by herself about what to do in an abusive situation.
Oh yeah, I I don't think it needs to be necessarily as big as this is, as this movie portrays it to be, like
Hmm.
to be
Yeah,
able to
because we're
have this
talking.
dialogue. Yeah.
Yeah, in this movie we're talking about a whole community of like trying to get up and or deciding to get up, take all their stuff and leave. But yeah, this could be just a group, a small group. It could be just one person. So I think that yeah, it's just great. All positive, wonderful. Loved it.
So inevitably they decide that their best option to stay true to their faith is to leave, because leaving shows that they're going to have pacifism, or else it would lead to violence. And they know they're going into the unknown, but it doesn't matter.
Right.
Everything's unknown.
Yeah, there's they touch on the subject of and the question of, well, where are we going to go if we decide to leave? What is that going to look like? What are we going to do? Where are we going to go? How are we going to live? They touch on those questions, but those questions are left unanswered and they're kind of avoided. And ultimately they decide to leave regardless of what that answer is. And I think that that is very important because I think that a lot of more people can relate to that. You know, if you're in an abusive situation, if you say to yourself, "Oh, I'm going to wait until I have an out, or I know where I'm going to go, or I have a place I can go, or I know of something I can do," then you're just going to keep waiting and you're waiting for tomorrow and that tomorrow doesn't come. But ultimately, the decision to just leave is much more powerful, and they use the idea that faith will help them out, but they also don't um that's not the only reason. Like they don't it's not blind faith, but it's certainly part of the process. And I think that regardless of your religion, if you decide to just get up and leave and go somewhere else and rely on your friends or social services or whatever, even if you're not a religious person, you have to have faith in that moment, faith in something, faith in yourself that
Yeah,
it's going to be okay.
yeah, and even if it isn't okay, it's better.
Yeah, yeah.
You at least have
Um,
agency now.
mhm. And that the choice of whatever that looks like is better than staying. And to go back to like the idea of staying and like, oh, we can't, you have to stay in order to keep your faith in the church and the religion and whatever and kingdom of heaven, blah blah blah. There's a great quote which is, our faith is stronger than our rules. So they turn that on itself and say, no, my faith in God and the religion, whatever, is so strong that it's more important than these rules that we've set up in this community. And I thought that that was just a really great moment in the film.
Yeah, it really acts as the final, like, uh, you know, going for broke. We're doing it.
Yeah.
So there are a couple other themes we'd like to talk about this movie.
Yeah, to pull us out of this like kind of dark hole uh that we have discussed. There's also a lot of beauty in this film, and I think it's worth mentioning and pointing out. I mean, this movie could have been a lot darker than it was. It could have
Oh
been
yeah,
really gross, really visceral, really terrible. But most of the scenes take place during the daytime. There's some scenes when they're packing at night and they're, baking bread and, gathering everything up. But they're doing it together and the homes are filled with light and from their lamps as they, get everything ready to go. But the film is absolutely full of moments of quiet, um, nature. sounds are happening when they're not talking, where you're seeing, the children playing, and you're seeing, innocence. You're seeing them braiding each other's hair. You're seeing them hold hands. You see them, spending time together and having, friendship. Like the friendship between the two girls who are like 13 or 14, like that is so clear and well presented, and it's so obvious and so well done. Um and it shows the that while, they're going through all of this trauma, there's also a lot of beauty. There's good weather, there's prosperity. They all have lots of food. It might be a lot of hard work, but there's a lot of prosperity there. They have a lot of stuff to take with them. um Not material goods, but, perishable things. And I just thought that all of those scenes were really beautiful. There's so many scenes of hugging, of, like taking care of the children, when one of them's sick, and the community coming together and, you know, showing this so much caring, which when you're watching a movie about, a serial sexual assault, you don't necessarily expect to see those tender moments.
No, and they do a really good job countering the, blood and disgust that does exist.
Hmm.
And I think it it goes a long way to show those scenes to prove how hopeful they still are.
Yeah, yeah, there's a lot of hope. There's a lot of happiness. When things get particularly rough in certain spots, and when, they become very emotional, they start to sing songs together. And whether those songs have religious connotations is unimportant. It's that singing a song together as a group is healing,
Yeah.
which, you know how I feel about musicals, so for
Oh
me to say
God.
that is really heavy.
Yeah, it is. This isn't a musical. There is some songs, but it's not a musical.
It is not a musical. But people do break out into song, and it doesn't feel weird, and that's okay with me.
Yeah, well, I think there's a huge difference between religious people breaking into religious songs, but
Yeah, but I mean, like,
it's
yeah,
not
I don't
it's
know.
it's not off-putting.
No, it's not. And not in the way that musicals can be. So that's good. So did you want to switch to our last or next slide?
Oh yeah.
So the other thing to talk about here is the, like systemic issues in a community, and people just standing by when someone is being abused. Um like somebody points out, and they're all kind of like fighting at this juncture. They say that, oh well, this one character, she just, does whatever her husband says, and he beats her up anyway, or something like that. Do you recall that conversation better? Because it is fleeting to me.
No, no,
You know what I'm
that's
talking about? No. Okay. Well, anyway, they're fighting, and it's heated, and she says a little bit later on, when they're, commenting about this, and about her likelihood that she just is going to do whatever her husband tells her to do. She says, "Who are you to pretend that I have had a choice?" And I think that that is important. It is such a powerful quote that, you know, women who are being abused and visibly abused, because later on in the movie,
oh,
her
she
husband does beat her
gets
up.
just destroyed.
Yeah, and she's visibly abused, and we're led to believe that that is something that happened to her often. And like, especially in a community where your loyalty to your husband is absolute, where, you can't go against something that the patriarchal figure says. Like, how can you expect someone to stand up and fight for themselves if you're not willing to fight for them either? Like, women in this position don't have a choice. If you can't fight back physically, which I'm sure she can't, maybe she tried in the beginning, but I mean, if she's getting the shit beat out of her regularly,
No, she won't have the energy to.
right? And it's up to the other members of the community to protect her. And
Absolutely.
to not do so is the fault of the community.
Yeah, so in many ways, this is like the last straw for these women and seeing each other be treated like this.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, that's all I got there.
It's this movie is a lot. It's not an easy watch by any means. It's not very
No.
pleasant, but it ends in a very hopeful atmosphere that
Yeah.
by acknowledging the horrors and terrors of what's going on and confronting them in a way that keeps you whole, you are able to move on and create a better world for your children, most importantly.
Yeah, yeah, that leaving, and they do leave, and you see them leave, and ultimately the image at the end is of Frances McDormand's character standing on her porch with her two daughters, watching everybody leave, and ultimately the two daughters run out and get on the wagon and leave as well. So she watches them all go, and I assume then she gets to go to heaven, whatever. But yeah,
Yeah,
I thought that
I
that was also
guess.
a powerful scene where, her daughters decide to leave. And there was also several moments where you see her daughters holding hands and, you know, I guess using each other to support each other. And
Well, I think
again,
one of them's blind,
oh yeah.
but yeah, that they get their agency away from their mother, which is just as important as the rest of the women and some of the younger male children that they bring along who gain their agency from the men. Is they
Hmm.
all realize that no matter who's oppressing us, we invariably have a choice to make on where we go next.
Yeah. Did you want to talk about the boys and that conversation?
Oh yeah, so uh, there are a bunch of other children that are here, and they're all left around. Um, and one of the things that the women talk about in Women Talking is whether or not they can bring their boy children along with them. And they, you know, very unanimously agree, oh, well, babies, 5 or 6 year olds, sure. 7 or 8 year olds, yeah. 10, 12, okay. What about the 13 to 15-year old? And this is where they elicit the help or the opinion of the school teacher. And this is where, like, I think his character gets like the one time to shine where he's talking about something that I think this is in his realm. This is the only advice he can give to these women is the experience of being a teenage boy and of being around them for so long and being able to say, oh yeah, they can be violent. They can be, inquisitive, sexual beings. They can be, you know, brash and they don't understand the consequences of their actions yet. They're not developed enough to understand that. And initially it's like, oh, that's kind of a gut punch to one of our main characters because she has a boy around this age and she doesn't want to abandon him because no one would want to abandon their child. And that's a point of contention, is abandoning your brothers and your children, like people who aren't directly involved. And he goes, well, if, they're still young, they're still able to be taught. And if you give them the love and the kindness that they need, they can go on to be, good men. And that's what it comes down to, is they let them join them as long as they're, able to be taught and educated to, never do something like this. And that's where you break that cycle of the next generation of raising these men in a place that doesn't have these, terrible gender binaries. And we see that very well in the children, that they already don't have a clear grasp on this, because there is a woman who experiences sexual assault and her mother commits suicide because of it, who uh, becomes a man then, that like she realizes, oh, she can no longer repress this feeling of being a man. And all the children, like, those are the only people that she can interact with and that treat her as Melvin, as the boy that she is. Or, sorry, I said that really wrong, but as who they are. And
Mm-hmm.
you see that in children, they don't understand the concept of like, the people who think like that is a wrong thing to be, or that is, not something that's okay. They're able to be molded, know that, oh yeah, this is, somebody we love and we play with and have, fun times, and they protect us and they heal our wounds and things like that. They are able to be taught a more open and honest way of life.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that story, the Melvin story, is an important one too that we didn't talk about.
Well,
And I mean,
it's very background. It's very much a side story to what's going on to the women talking because they're not a part of it. Um,
right.
but it's one of those that like it's hooked on there as another, these are Frances McDormand's children and their rise to agency, and this is their acceptance in the wider world and how that is affected and represented in the children who are malleable to these ideas.
Hmm. Yeah, and I mean that's something that comes up a lot in the current discussions of gender binary and pronouns and all that jazz, is that kids, they don't care. They can deal with the idea that somebody has two moms. I mean, especially when, like, gosh, when I was in high school or in elementary school, all the kids had two dads and two moms because they had step parents. So it was like, okay, makes sense. um so just having two moms and no dads also makes sense. Fine, whatever. But yeah, yeah, kids have a lot. They can understand these things because there's no systemic, system of the world that they have to, fit everybody into, that has already been prescribed by, years of oppression and all that jazz. So yeah, that's that.
Yeah, so what did we learn?
Yeah, so I didn't want to talk about this in the context of the movie too much, but this book and the movie then were based on a true story, a real thing that happened in a Mennonite community in Bolivia, where these men were convicted of uh, tranquilizing and sexually assaulting young girls in the community. And it went on for at least 4 years, I think you said.
Yeah, 4 years. They say about 150 cases. They said the ages ranged from, I think, 4 to 65. and there have been some boys that are implicated, but none of that's come forward, like male victims as well.
Yeah, and for all of this to happen, they ended up catching somebody in the act, just like in the movie. And then after that, all of these women had to come forward and testify to this in court. They had to learn Spanish to do it because they were in Bolivia. They all spoke a either English or a Pennsylvania Dutch.
It was like
Um,
a version of German or something. It was,
yeah, like a German dialect of some kind that had been used in the community. None of them could read. Um, and then, as we noted in the beginning of the film, they didn't have words to describe what happened, in their language at all. So to have to get up on the stand and talk about this in a foreign language took an amazing amount of courage and faith and community. Um, to do this and to break the cycle. And I know I was reading about the story of the community right now. There are a lot of members of they didn't leave; they stayed in the community.
and they
Many of them,
started to like board up their windows and stuff, put metal bars on them so nobody could ever come back in.
yeah. I think some of them went to different Mennonite communities in the area. Apparently, in Bolivia, there's a large population of these religious farming communities. And there are
Yes,
people in the community that still want these men to come back and think that they're innocent.
yeah, that's just delusional.
Yeah. There's accusations that this was also a larger conspiracy by elders in the community and stuff like that, which I can also believe if this is part of a systemic violence that's been going on for generations. Um, one person gets caught, then we have to, like, let's round up the 10 most annoying people in the community and blame them for everything. Um, but I mean there's no denying that a crime occurred and that at least some of these people are responsible.
Yeah,
And, it speaks to the wider problems that were discussed in this film that, it's the community's responsibility to take care of these things and to stop these kinds of things from happening. I mean, the technical crimes that were occurring were they were spraying some kind of insecticide, I think, in the houses and putting everybody to sleep,
yeah,
or some kind of tranquilizer. It was like a spray that was used in farming or something.
yeah. The person that was supplying it to them ended up also going to jail for 12 years.
Yeah,
So less than I think the 25 years each of them got for their crimes, but they're responsible.
yeah. And what will in doing this, everyone in the house was being put to sleep. So, you know, I guess it's possible that, no one would then, everybody would be confused about what happened. But I mean, I guess it's very naive to think that nobody understood what was happening. I don't know.
Yeah,
There are a lot of questions there that I have. And I think the other thing that we should point out is that the film largely is what, 10 women talking?
yeah, if that.
But this was a much larger community than that. I mean, there were hundreds of people involved in this thing that happened. So, I mean, to me, that speaks of a very large cover up.
Yeah, I want to say there were like 2,000 people in this Mennonite camp, and in the movie, it really seems like there are maybe like 200 or 300 people. Like it's
Hmm.
not that large. Um, but yeah, no, this is a really crazy and awful story that got translated, I think, very well to the screen.
Yeah, I think that the the use of this story to speak to larger issues and to speak to abuse and community and forgiveness and faith and togetherness and sisterhood and all of those elements that we discussed. I think it was a great way to use this story for good. I think that a lot of these kinds of true crime, cults related, kinds of things can become very voyeuristic and performative
Yeah.
and icky. I'm thinking about that show that I watched earlier this summer about the cult, which was a dramatization, and it certainly did not have these kinds of strong themes and messaging that this does. And I think that it was just very well done.
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely worth a watch. I don't think that we've spoiled anything. If anything, I think that going into it with this much knowledge is better. Um, if you haven't seen it, which I assume most people have not. It's not been a very well watched film.
Yeah, which is unfortunate. I don't know if you brought this up this time or when we were talking earlier, but like this isn't just a movie for people who've been victims of these sort of incidences. It's I got a lot out of it. I haven't been a victim of anything. Um,
Yeah, and I'm really glad that you can say that and that you can, because I guess I was kind of concerned once I watched some of those reviews of men just not getting it, and I was like, oh, like, are we even going to be able to have a conversation about this? Am I just so ingrained in my feminist ideals that I feel so viscerally animated about this?
well, I
But
was worried that I wouldn't be able to talk about it or have the words to talk about it because I don't have the experience. But I think the experience transcends necessarily what it is. Like it's applicable to a lot of the larger issues and even the male perspective, and this is touched on of like, what it means to have an opinion and place in society, which is something that like, as a man, I think is a lot more clear cut because I've been exposed to a lot of, manly man stuff. Like
yeah,
I don't know how to describe it other than that, but like I you grow up and you see your role as like a provider, or at least like that's kind of how it was framed for a bit. And it's like, well, that's, a simplification of what's prescribed to these men. Um,
yeah, and I mean they're the male privilege, that kind of thing.
yeah, I mean, the
Yeah.
mere fact that I haven't been a victim of of any of this, and that, women very frequently are, and as you said, have probably experienced something akin to it, is
Hmm.
indicative of the existence of the problem of the society that creates this issue.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean even something, thinking about it, broadly, again, I was thinking about Clarice Starling again, like anything, even something as simple as catcalling can produce just a visceral like ickiness when you don't want that kind of attention,
Yeah.
and that's something that almost all women have experienced.
Oh yeah.
um
Yeah.
and yeah, I think that mm, yeah, I'm not sure where I'm going with that train of thought, but
Yeah, I mean
yeah.
that's the low point, or that's the minimum, is this like attention women have for just being women and men for having lustful desire. Like
Hmm.
it's
Well,
very
and
primal.
yeah, and the inhibition to act on that lustful desire, I think, is the issue. Where, like women are never going to, I mean, like, I guess that's not true. Women might, but women are less likely to, whistle at a hot guy than a man will be.
Yes,
Like
yes.
there's so much less inhibition culturally.
Well, and
Yeah.
and and how many men in media have we seen do this? And then
Right, yeah.
as a child growing up and seeing, oh well, these construction workers doing the whistle, that's okay because the construction workers on TV are doing it. You know what I mean? It's those sort of little things that perpetuate this cycle.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, and as they said in the movie, like the 13-year-old boys can be violent and gross and create do sexual violence, but they also can be taught that that's wrong. And it's up to the community to make those changes.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I feel
Yeah.
like we have added on some good comments, explained some of the poor media literacy that exists surrounding this film.
Yeah.
Have been able to, I think, recontextualize parts of it at least to fit like a much broader narrative. But the movie does a good job alluding to that.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad we could have a good conversation about this and hopefully fill kind of one of the big holes that I noticed in the discourse about this movie. And um, yeah, I hope that you, the viewer, can go watch it if you've listened to us for this long. If not, we just had a really great conversation. And like and subscribe and all that jazz. Let us know what you thought. Anything you would add to this conversation. Any other serious movies that maybe don't get a lot of attention that we should watch. I would love to see more movies like this one that are so serious. We'll probably be watching some lighthearted ones coming up next, but you know, I think this was a great conversation, and I look forward to having more serious conversations about serious movies that have so much to say about the world.
Yeah, it's really my favorite part about film is it's a medium that encompasses most of the other parts of art, and I think all art can have a voice and say a lot of amazing things. So when a movie comes out that says so much about society, it's nice to be able to sit down and talk about it and talk about what it means to each one of us because, as we've discussed, it's different.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people will be coming at this movie with a lot of different perspectives. I imagine there's a lot of people who couldn't watch it.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
and there were a few points in the movie where I was very emotional, and not emotional like crying during Interstellar, but angry.
Hmm.
Um, and feeling a lot of different feelings, a lot of memories, a lot of those kinds of things. So I don't necessarily think this movie is for everybody. I think there's a lot of trigger warnings that probably need to be spoken. Maybe we should have done that earlier. Sorry.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's
well,
post.
yeah, yeah. We can insert a post for all the trigger warnings like we did on Titanic. We talked about substantially less infanticide and suicide in this one,
Yes, yes, we did.
so that's positive.
We
But
Yeah, not
yeah,
none, but
not none,
less.
but less. Yep.
Well, on that note, thank you, everyone.
Yeah. Thanks, and we'll see you next week.
Yeah, goodbye.